The autumn fog clung to the cobblestone streets of the small town of Ilford, its tendrils weaving through the old buildings like a living thing. The air was damp and the quiet of the town was almost suffocating. The kind of silence that made everything feel too still, as if the world was holding its breath. Eliza Harrington had grown accustomed to this eerie tranquility. She had moved back to her childhood home, a centuries-old manor that seemed to groan under the weight of history. She hadn't visited for years, not since the tragic death of her parents. Now she was alone, with nothing but the house's heavy silence to keep her company. The shadows in the corners of the rooms always seemed to move, and sometimes she could almost hear whispers, like faint voices calling her name. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a bruised shade of purple, Eliza returned home after a walk through the woods. The mailbox outside her gate was empty as usual. But that night something was different. A letter lay on the ground near the postbox, weathered and torn as though it had been there for years. She picked it up and a shiver ran down her spine. The envelope was old, the paper yellowed with age. There was no return address, only her name, Eliza Harrington, written in delicate script. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't received a letter in ages, especially not one like this. Curiosity got the best of her and she carefully opened the envelope, pulling out a single sheet of paper. It was folded in thirds and when she unfolded it, the words seemed to jump off the page. "Dear Eliza," it began. "If you are reading this, then the worst is about to happen. I know it sounds impossible, but I am you. From the future. And I am writing to warn you of a tragedy that will strike tomorrow. You will be involved in a car accident. You will not survive it unless you change your course." Eliza's breath caught in her throat. She blinked, reading the words again and then a third time. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the letter. A warning from the future? It was absurd. How could that even be possible? Yet there it was, in black and white. The letter continued, "You may not believe me, but trust this. The car you will ride in is unsafe. The driver will be distracted, and the road will be slick from rain. You must find another way home. Do not take the car. Do not go down that road." A chill ran through Eliza, and for a moment she felt as though the room had grown colder. She had no intention of taking a car that day, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that this letter was warning her about something she couldn't avoid. The strangest part, however, was the postmark. She turned the envelope over and examined the faded stamp. It was dated October 21, 1975, 50 years ago. How could this letter be from the past? Her hands trembled as she sat down in the old armchair by the window. The moonlight spilled across the floor, casting long, twisted shadows. She was no stranger to the strange occurrences that had plagued the manor for years. Whispers in the halls, the feeling of being watched. But this was different. This letter felt real. Felt urgent. The next morning, Eliza went about her day with the nagging sense that something was amiss. She ignored the letter for a while, convincing herself that it was some sort of prank or a figment of her imagination. But as the day wore on, strange things began to happen. The weather, which had been clear in the morning, suddenly shifted. A heavy rain began to fall, and the streets outside her window grew slick with water. It was the moment she saw her reflection in the window that everything changed. For a brief second, her own face seemed to warp, twisting into something unrecognizable, but when she blinked, it was gone. She shook her head, trying to dismiss it, but the unease lingered. As evening approached, Eliza couldn't ignore the feeling any longer. She checked the time. Her appointment with her friend, Louise, was in less than an hour. She was supposed to take the car, the one from the letter. The very one that would crash. Suddenly, every instinct screamed at her to act. She grabbed her coat and dashed outside, her breath coming in short gasps. She could already hear the distant sound of an approaching vehicle. The letter's words were burned into her mind, "Do not take the car." Without thinking, Eliza turned away from the road and sprinted down the alley, her feet pounding against the wet pavement. She didn't know why she was doing this, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her life depended on it. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. And when the crash occurred, just as the letter had predicted, she was nowhere near it. Eliza stumbled back to the manor in a daze, her mind reeling. The car had crashed. The driver, her old friend Louise, was dead. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she collapsed on the floor of the living room. The letter had saved her. But as she sat there, still shaking, a new thought slowly crept into her mind. The letter? It had come from herself. From the future. And if that was true, what else could it mean? Would there be more warnings? More choices to be made? The truth, Eliza realized, was far darker than she had ever imagined. The letter had come from her, but what if it wasn't just a warning? What if the future she had saved herself from was only the beginning? She had to know. She had to find out. And so, she began to search for the answers. Answers that might just reveal the horrifying truth about the future she had narrowly escaped. The days that followed the crash felt like a blur to Eliza. She had narrowly avoided death, yet the feeling of dread clung to her like a heavy fog. She couldn't shake the unsettling thought that her escape from the accident was no coincidence. The letter, which had come from her own future, had warned her in a way that seemed far too specific, too precise. And now, as she stood in the manor's grand hallway, the weight of its implications pressed down on her chest. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and dust. Eliza's fingers grazed the edges of the old portraits hanging on the walls, their eyes seeming to follow her every movement. The manor was alive in its own way, with whispers that crept through the cracks, carried on the cold drafts. At times, she thought she could hear faint footsteps echoing in the empty halls, or the sound of something shifting behind a closed door. But whenever she investigated, there was nothing. Just the heavy silence of a house that had seen centuries of secrets. But she couldn't ignore the letter. The truth of it gnawed at her, pulling her toward something dark, something that was far older than the present. She had no idea how the letter had reached her or why it had been sent, but she was certain of one thing: it was a warning. And if it was true that she had escaped death, then what lay ahead? Could the future truly be changed, or was it merely a temporary delay? Eliza needed answers, and she knew where to start. She had spent her childhood reading about the history of the manor and its mysterious past. The local library, just a short walk away, housed a collection of old records, journals, and town histories. Perhaps something in those dusty pages could shed light on the strange occurrences that surrounded her. The evening was growing dark as Eliza made her way to the library, the wind howling through the trees. The town seemed quieter now, almost as though it too was holding its breath. When she reached the library, the old iron gates creaked as she pushed them open. The stone building loomed in front of her, its windows dark and empty, but the flickering light inside offered a strange comfort. Inside, the smell of aged paper and leather hit her. The library was vast, with towering shelves that seemed to stretch endlessly into the dimly lit corners of the room. She made her way to the farthest section, where the oldest volumes were stored, some of them so fragile that the pages threatened to disintegrate with the lightest touch. Eliza began to sift through the dusty shelves, her fingers brushing the spines of forgotten books, searching for anything that might explain what was happening to her. Hours passed. The air grew colder. The fire in the hearth had long since died down, leaving the room shrouded in an unsettling stillness. Eliza was just about to give up, her eyes aching from the dim light and the countless pages she had turned, when a small weathered book caught her attention. Its cover was plain, with no title, just an intricate design that seemed to shimmer in the low light. She pulled it from the shelf, her heart racing as she flipped through the brittle pages. The book detailed the history of the manor and its previous owners, stretching back to the 1600s. But as she skimmed through the pages, one entry caught her eye. It described a strange phenomenon that had occurred centuries ago, something so bizarre and terrifying that it had been wiped from the official records. The entry read, "The cursed letter, bound by blood, passed through time." Eliza's hand trembled as she read the words again. The cursed letter? Was this what had happened to her? Had it really come from the future? She continued reading. It is said that the manor's lineage is intertwined with an ancient curse, one that involves the manipulation of time itself. Those who live in the manor are destined to receive a letter from their future self, warning them of a tragic event. If the letter is heeded, the recipient is spared, but the price is always a deepening of the curse, a spiral into darkness. Her breath caught in her throat. Was she trapped in something she couldn't escape? The letter had saved her life, but at what cost? She read on, desperate for more information. The letter itself is not just a warning but a tether, a means by which the future can manipulate the present. The one who receives it must understand that they are part of a cycle. The past, present, and future are all intertwined. And as the letter shifts through time, so too does the fate of the one who holds it. Each time the cycle repeats, the curse grows stronger. The cycle must be broken or it will consume them. Eliza closed the book with a loud snap, her pulse racing. She felt a cold sweat break out on the back of her neck. This was impossible. She wasn't just part of a warning, she was part of a curse. The letter had not been a simple message from her future self, but a manifestation of something far darker, something that tied her fate to the manor itself. The sound of footsteps echoed through the library, and Eliza froze, her heart hammering in her chest. She turned, expecting to see a librarian or perhaps a visitor, but there was no one there. The room was empty, save for the shadows that seemed to creep along the walls. Then, as if in response to her fear, the whispers began. Low and unintelligible at first, they grew louder, more distinct. Her name. Eliza. It was a voice she recognized, but it wasn't hers. It was the voice of the woman who had died in the car crash. Louise? You shouldn't have listened to the letter, the voice whispered. It was never meant to save you. A chill swept through the room and Eliza stumbled backward, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The walls seemed to close in on her and the room grew darker, colder. The shadows on the floor stretched out like long, twisted hands reaching for her. You're already too late, the voice continued, now just a breath against her ear. The future is set. There is no escape. Eliza spun around, but there was still no one there. She backed toward the door, her mind racing. The whispers were growing louder, more frantic. She reached for the handle, her fingers slipping from the sweat on her palms. She could feel the presence, something ancient and malevolent, growing stronger. It was coming for her. The last thing she saw before the darkness overtook her was the old book lying open on the table, its pages fluttering as if caught in an unseen wind. And on one of those pages the words began to rewrite themselves. The cycle has begun again. When Eliza awoke, she was no longer in the library. She was in her own bed, the familiar surroundings of her manor room offering no comfort. The night had passed, but something had changed. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed deeper, more alive. And the air felt heavier. The letter was gone. But Eliza knew one thing for certain. The curse had only just begun. Eliza's heart pounded in her chest as she sat up in bed, her body drenched in cold sweat. The room around her seemed unnaturally still, the oppressive silence thickening the air. She could feel her pulse racing in her ears, the echoes of the whispers still haunting her, as though the very walls of the manor were closing in on her. The shadows that had once seemed so innocuous now loomed ominously at the edges of the room, stretching unnaturally long as if to reach out for her. The dim light filtering through the curtains seemed wrong, sickly and gray, as though the sun itself had been consumed by something darker. The letter was gone. She had not imagined the voices. She had not imagined the sinister presence that had filled the library. The whispers had been real. But so had the book, the cursed knowledge of the manor, the warnings about the cycle. The letter from her future self had been the key to something far more terrifying than she had ever conceived. And now, it seemed, the cycle had begun anew. Eliza swung her legs over the side of the bed, her feet touching the cold, uneven floor. The sudden chill of the stone beneath her skin made her shiver, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. She had to find answers. She had to break this curse before it consumed her, before it took everything she loved. She hurried to the small desk in the corner of the room, her hands shaking as she rifled through the scattered papers. The letter, the one that had saved her life, was gone as if it had never existed at all. It was as though the very fabric of reality had been altered. Eliza's breath caught in her throat as she glanced toward the window. The mist outside seemed denser, thicker, swirling like a living thing. She could barely make out the faint silhouette of the manor's gate through the fog. The whispers came again, faint but undeniable. This time they were clearer, louder, more insistent. Eliza, you cannot escape. Her eyes darted around the room, panic clawing at her chest. She had to leave, had to get away from this place, this house, this curse, but the whispers, they were everywhere. And they were getting closer. With trembling hands, Eliza grabbed her coat from the back of the chair and bolted from the room. She ran down the long, dark hallway, past the portraits that seemed to leer at her, their eyes following her every move. She couldn't help but glance back over her shoulder, as though expecting to see something lurking in the shadows behind her. At the bottom of the staircase, she paused, hearing the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching from the other side of the manor. Footsteps that were far too deliberate, too heavy, to belong to anyone who could be alive. The air grew colder with each passing second, and the faint smell of something rotten filled her nostrils. Suddenly the front door slammed open and Eliza staggered back in shock. There, standing in the doorway, was a figure she had not seen in years. Louise? The woman standing before her was not the Louise she remembered. The vibrant, life-filled friend she had known was gone. In her place was a hollow shell, her skin pale and drawn tight against her skull. Her eyes, once full of warmth, were now hollow, sunken pits, like black voids that seemed to absorb all the light around them. And her lips were twisted into a cruel, knowing smile. You shouldn't have listened to the letter, Louise's voice croaked, an unnatural rasp that sent chills down Eliza's spine. Now you've sealed your fate. Eliza stumbled backward, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. The figure of Louise was distorted, like a reflection in a cracked mirror, an illusion, yet her presence was unmistakably real. The very air seemed to thrum with tension, as if the house itself was alive with malignant energy. "It's not over, Eliza," Louise continued, her smile widening. "The cycle will never end. You're only the latest in a long line. You think you can change your fate, but the letter only exists to ensure that it happens. It's all part of the curse." Eliza's heart raced as she tried to take a step back, but her legs felt like lead. The whispers filled her ears again, louder now, almost deafening. She covered her ears, but the sound was relentless. The walls of the manor seemed to close in around her, pressing her toward the figure of Louise. Every step she took felt like a trap, like the house itself was conspiring against her. "You're not meant to escape," Louise hissed, her voice now a low growl. "We're all trapped here, Eliza. All of us who've ever lived in this cursed place. The letter binds us together, looping our fates, intertwining the past and the future. You can't outrun it. You'll never be free." Eliza's mind spun. The words she was hearing were incomprehensible, but somehow, they resonated with her deepest fears. The curse was real. It was not just some superstition. It was a tangible force, an inescapable web that had already claimed her and so many others before her. The letter from the future, the warning, had been part of a much larger, darker plan. She wasn't meant to survive. She was meant to repeat the cycle. And yet, the voice that had spoken to her in the library, the voice that had warned her of the cycle's beginning, it had not been Louise. It had been something else, something deeper, older. The presence that had whispered to her had not been human. "What do you want from me?" Eliza demanded, her voice shaking but defiant. Louise's eyes seemed to widen for a moment, and the air grew colder still. The temperature dropped drastically, and Eliza could see her breath in the air, misting in front of her. But it wasn't just the cold. The very essence of the room felt distorted, warped, as though time itself had begun to unravel. She could feel the house pushing against her, as though it was trying to swallow her whole. "I want you to understand, Eliza," Louise replied, her voice now an eerie sing-song, like a lullaby from the abyss. "I want you to know that you're already lost." Before Eliza could react, the figure of Louise lunged forward, her pale, skeletal hand grabbing Eliza by the wrist with an unnatural strength. Eliza screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the oppressive silence that filled the room. And then, with a flicker of light and a rush of cold wind, the world around Eliza seemed to collapse in on itself. The walls of the manor twisted, warping as though they were made of smoke, and the floor beneath her feet turned to a liquid darkness. Eliza felt herself falling into an abyss, as the whispers reached a deafening crescendo. And through it all, the same words echoed in her mind. "The cycle has begun again." The last thing she saw before everything went black was the distorted face of Louise, her smile never fading. And then, silence. When Eliza opened her eyes again, she was no longer in the manor. She was lying in a cold, dark place, the ground beneath her rough and uneven. The air was thick with the smell of earth and decay. She stood up slowly, her legs trembling as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. It was a graveyard. But not just any graveyard. The headstones were cracked, their inscriptions faded, as though they had been forgotten by time. In the distance she saw a figure standing, waiting. It was Louise. And Eliza knew in that moment that she had entered a place beyond the bounds of time, a place where the curse would claim her once and for all. The cycle had come to its final, dreadful conclusion. The graveyard stretched out endlessly before Eliza, a sea of crumbling headstones and moss-covered tombs. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the oppressive weight of the place hung over her like a suffocating cloud. Her heart pounded in her chest as she took hesitant steps forward, her feet sinking into the damp earth beneath her. The moonlight, pale and cold, filtered through a thick mist that seemed to rise from the very ground, wrapping around her like an ancient shroud. Every direction she looked, there was nothing but the endless rows of graves, all worn by time and neglect. And then there was Louise. The figure stood at the far end of the graveyard, motionless, as though waiting for Eliza to approach. Her twisted smile, so unnatural and full of malice, stretched wider the closer Eliza got. But it was not the smile that terrified her. It was the eyes. Those hollow, empty eyes that seemed to draw her in, that held within them the echoes of a fate that had already been sealed. Eliza's legs shook as she walked toward her. Each step felt heavier, as though the earth itself was pulling her down. She had no choice but to face what lay ahead. She had no choice but to confront whatever this place was, and whatever it had in store for her. The letter, the warning from her future self, the crash. It was all part of a dark puzzle she had never been meant to solve. Every piece of the curse, every twist of fate, had led her here, to this graveyard, to this moment. Louise? Eliza's voice cracked as she spoke the name, the word barely escaping her lips. What is this place? Louise did not respond immediately. She stood motionless, her face a twisted reflection of the woman Eliza had once known. The only sound was the wind, whispering through the trees, and the occasional rustle of dead leaves scraping against the stone ground. Finally, Louise spoke, her voice a low, echoing rasp that seemed to reverberate within Eliza's skull. This is where it all ends. The place where time collapses. The place where you and I, where all of us, are bound forever. Eliza's mind raced. What do you mean? What is this curse? Why me? Louise tilted her head slightly, the motion eerily bird-like, her smile never faltering. You were never meant to escape. The letter was not a gift, Eliza. It was a chain. A chain that binds you to the curse of this place. Every generation, every person who has lived here has been part of the same cycle, sent to relive their fate over and over again. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. You're telling me this is all my fault? No, Louise's voice softened, though the malice never left it. It is not just your fault. It is the fault of this place. The manor, the land, it is cursed. And you, Eliza, are part of that curse. You are the key to its perpetuation. Eliza's head swam as the realization hit her. The letter, the warning from her future self, it wasn't just a coincidence. It wasn't just a random act of kindness. It had been orchestrated. The curse had reached out to her, manipulated her into taking part in the cycle. She was nothing more than a pawn, a victim to a force that had no intention of letting her go. Why did you warn me? Eliza whispered. If I was part of the curse, why did you send me that letter? Louise stepped closer, the smile fading, replaced by a look that seemed almost pitying. Because, my dear Eliza, I wanted you to understand. I wanted you to see the truth before it was too late. The letter was not meant to save you. It was meant to wake you up, to show you that you could never change your fate. Eliza felt a cold hand clutch her heart as the weight of Louise's words sank in. Then why am I here? If I'm trapped, why can't I remember everything? Why did it all feel like a dream? The curse works in layers, Louise said, her voice thick with something that sounded like resignation. You've been living in the illusion of time. But the truth is, this graveyard, this place, is where it all comes together. The beginning and the end. Time is not linear here. You have lived, and you have died, and you will continue to live and die in this cycle. The letter, the warning, it was just a part of the game. Look. A promise that cannot be broken. Eliza felt the earth beneath her feet grow softer, as though it were shifting beneath her, warping, pulling her deeper into the graveyard. She could hear the distant rumble of thunder, though the sky above remained cloudless. The wind picked up again, swirling around her, carrying with it an unsettling murmur, a chant, a call from the past. You are part of the curse. The voice was not Louise's. It was an ancient whisper, one that sounded like it had been born from the soil itself. Eliza's vision blurred as the world around her seemed to twist, the graveyard stretching impossibly far into the distance, as though time itself had fragmented. Do you understand now? Louise's voice cut through the disorienting sensation. This place, this graveyard, is where the dead are not buried. We are not forgotten. We are all still here, repeating our fates over and over again. And you, Eliza, will never leave. Not until the cycle is complete. Eliza staggered back, her mind reeling. I can't accept this. There must be a way out. There has to be. Louise's hollow gaze turned cold, her expression unreadable. You cannot escape what you are. The earth beneath Eliza's feet gave way, and she found herself falling. Falling through darkness, through endless corridors of time. She screamed, but the sound was lost, swallowed by the void. The wind howled around her, deafening, and the voices of the dead whispered in unison. The cycle has already begun. When Eliza's feet finally hit solid ground again, she found herself standing before a massive, crumbling stone archway. Beyond it, she could see the faint outline of the manor, but it was warped, twisted, as though it had been pulled from some nightmare. The windows stared back at her like black eyes, unblinking, watching her approach. Welcome back, a voice echoed through the darkness. It was her own voice. Eliza turned, her heart freezing as she saw herself standing behind her. The woman before her was older, more worn, but her eyes, they were the same. The same black, empty voids. Eliza, the figure whispered. You cannot outrun the curse. You will always return. This is your fate. Tears welled in Eliza's eyes as she took a step back, trembling. No. I won't accept this. I can change it. I can stop it. But her future self only smiled, a cruel, knowing smile, and the world around Eliza seemed to crumble into nothingness. The cycle has come full circle. And as Eliza reached out, she realized there was no escape. Not now. Not ever. The curse had claimed her. Eliza stood motionless in front of the twisted version of herself, her heart hammering in her chest as the ground beneath her shifted again, warping, distorting. The manor loomed behind her, its decrepit facade bleeding into the surrounding fog like a phantom of the past, suffocating her with the weight of history. The dark eyes of her future self, hollow and endless, seemed to pull at her soul, making her feel as though she were on the precipice of something far deeper and more terrifying than she could ever have imagined. Her mouth was dry, her thoughts jumbled as she tried to make sense of the scene. The landscape around her rippled like a mirage. One moment, it felt like the graveyard was stretching toward eternity, the next, it was the manor again, but a version she hadn't yet seen, where the architecture seemed far older and more oppressive. Time here was not a straight line. It looped, it bent, it shattered into pieces, leaving Eliza unsure of what was real and what was simply a figment of the curse that twisted the very fabric of her existence. Do you understand now? Her future self asked again, the voice cold and monotonous. It's all a lie. You are part of this place. Part of its curse. No, Eliza breathed, the word a desperate gasp, her hands trembling as she stepped back. I won't be a part of this. I can break it. I can change it. There must be a way. Her future self smiled, but it was not a comforting smile. It was the kind of smile one wears when they have seen far too much, when the weight of time has crushed every hope and every dream. There is no changing it, Eliza. There never was. You are already dead in this place. You always have been. The word struck her like a blow. The realization, no matter how hard she fought it, began to seep into her bones. Could it be true? Was this some sick joke? Or was she really trapped in a cycle that stretched across time, destined to relive the same horrors, the same loss, the same death over and over again? No. I can't be dead, she whispered, her voice shaking as though the very thought of it might shatter her. She had seen the crash. She had seen her life slip away in an instant. But this was worse. This was a fate without an end. A place where death itself couldn't release her. Her future self's eyes darkened, the expression morphing into something far more menacing. You died the moment you arrived here. You were always meant to die. You never left the night of the crash. Eliza's knees buckled, her breath coming in jagged gasps. This was too much. Her hands gripped the sides of her head, as if trying to hold her thoughts together, trying to deny the crushing reality that was slowly, inevitably consuming her. Why do you keep saying that? Eliza choked out, her voice breaking. The figure before her stepped closer, its gaze unwavering, its face now even more unsettling than before. Because it's the truth. Your letter, the one you received from yourself, it wasn't meant to help you. It was to remind you that you've always been here. Always. You never left. Time doesn't work the same here, Eliza. The moment you stepped into that manor, you entered a place that exists outside of time. The words stung like cold wind, cutting through her fragile resolve. But, what is this place? Eliza's voice cracked as she struggled to understand. What do you want from me? What am I supposed to do? Her future self remained silent for a long moment, the air thick with a palpable tension, until finally, it spoke in a voice that held no hope. You don't understand, do you? You are part of a family trapped in this place, generation after generation caught in this cycle. You are not the first and you won't be the last. What are you talking about? Eliza whispered, feeling the blood drain from her face. What do you mean? My family. Her future self's eyes hardened, a coldness now etched into its features. Do you think your bloodline was special? That you were chosen for something greater? No. You were chosen by fate just like every one of us before you. Our family line is bound to this place, tied to its curse. And it will continue, your death, your rebirth, your futile attempts to escape, until the very end of time. Eliza could hardly breathe, the weight of the truth settling heavily on her chest. Her bloodline. Her family. The same family who had lived here in this cursed manor. They too were bound to the endless loop. Generations of them had died, only to be born again into the same nightmare. The ground beneath her feet trembled again, and the whispering voices grew louder, more insistent. You are the last one, Eliza. The final cycle is beginning. And there is no way out. She stumbled backward, her mind reeling as her surroundings warped once again. The graveyard dissolved and she found herself back in the manor. But this time it was different. The walls were cracked and crumbling, the once grand staircase now a twisted ruin. The air smelled of dust and mildew, and the entire house seemed to groan under the weight of years. Centuries even. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're here," her future self said. "Here where it all begins. The heart of the curse. The place where your soul will forever be bound." Eliza's head spun. She felt herself losing control, her thoughts scattering like dry leaves in the wind. She had to find a way out. She had to escape. But how? How could she break the cycle when she didn't even know where it began? Suddenly, a new sound echoed through the air, a slow, deliberate creaking followed by a soft thudding like footsteps. The manor's front door creaked open and a figure stepped inside. Eliza's heart leapt into her throat as she recognized the person who had entered. It was her. But it wasn't the woman she had become. It was a version of herself from another time, young, bright-eyed, and full of life. The same face, the same features, but with a strange, eerie sense of innocence. Her clothes were different too. She wore a dress from an era long past, a relic of another time. The figure stopped in front of Eliza, her expression confused but calm. "Who are you?" the younger Eliza asked, her voice soft and untainted by the horrors that Eliza had already faced. "How did you get here?" Eliza whispered, stepping back, feeling her heart race in her chest. No, this can't be happening." But the younger version of herself merely smiled, the smile of someone who had not yet understood the weight of the curse. She reached out a hand as though to touch Eliza's arm. "You're not real," Eliza gasped, shaking her head. "You can't be real. This is all part of the curse, part of the cycle." The younger Eliza blinked, her smile faltering as her eyes flickered with confusion. "Cycle? What are you talking about? What's happening?" Eliza stumbled back, tears blurring her vision. She could feel the walls of the manor closing in on her, the weight of the curse pushing down on her soul. But she couldn't stop it. She couldn't stop what had already begun. "Please?" Eliza whispered, her voice breaking as she looked at the younger version of herself. "Please don't let this happen. Don't let this be the end." But the younger Eliza's expression remained unchanged. She was already lost to the cycle. Just like Eliza would be. Just like they all had been. The ground beneath her feet trembled again, and the manor seemed to shake as though it were alive. The doors slammed shut, and the windows shattered, revealing only endless blackness outside. The whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, filling her ears, drowning her thoughts. The cycle has begun again. And Eliza realized with a sickening certainty that there was no way out. There never had been. The walls of the manor seemed to pulse with a rhythm of their own, a dark heartbeat that matched the frantic pounding of Eliza's chest. She stumbled forward, her steps unsteady, as though the very ground beneath her was no longer solid. The air felt thick, suffocating, and the whispers of the dead rose in a chorus of voices that seemed to echo from the very fabric of the house. Eliza's younger self stood motionless, her eyes vacant, the smile still hanging on her lips like a forgotten memory. The innocence in her expression was unsettling now, like the face of someone who had been erased, who was caught in a moment before the horror had fully taken root. Eliza reached out a trembling hand toward her, but the closer she got, the farther away the girl seemed to drift. No, I can't lose you too," Eliza whispered, her voice hoarse as she fought to make sense of the fractured reality around her. "I can't be stuck in this nightmare." The house groaned as though it was alive, its wooden beams creaking in protest. The whispers of those who had come before her intensified, rising into a cacophony that drowned out her thoughts, until it was all she could hear. The cycle has begun again. Eliza turned, her eyes wild with desperation. She had to do something. She had to break free to escape this curse, this endless loop that had imprisoned her and every generation before her. But there was nothing left to break. She had no power here. The manor, the graveyard, the cursed bloodline, everything was a part of her now and she was a part of it. She sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face as she whispered to the air. "Please. I can't do this anymore. I don't want to be part of this anymore." The voices softened, the shadows lengthening around her. A cold wind rushed through the manor, extinguishing the dim candlelight that had flickered in the distance. The entire house seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting for her to accept the inevitable. And in that moment, Eliza felt it, the faintest spark of realization. The curse wasn't something she could break. It wasn't something that could be stopped by will or strength or desperation. The curse wasn't an external force, it was a reflection of herself. The cycle wasn't just bound to the house, it was bound to her soul. She stood, her legs shaking but her resolve hardening. She wasn't going to give in. She wasn't going to let this be the end. Maybe she couldn't escape it, but she could face it. The letter had warned her, had shown her the way. It had shown her that there was no escape because the escape was not what she thought. The escape wasn't about running away or breaking the curse. It was about understanding it. Eliza reached out, not to the past or the future but to the present. To the girl standing before her, to the echoes of herself that lingered in the walls of the manor. She knew now what she had to do. "I'm sorry," Eliza whispered to the younger version of herself. "I'm sorry that I couldn't save you. But I can make sure that this stops. Not for me, not for us, but for everyone who will come after." The air around her shimmered as time itself seemed to falter. The whispers, the sound of her own voice, the cries of the lost, it all started to fade just for a moment like the briefest breath before the storm. And in that silence, Eliza felt the weight of it lift. The manor, the cycle, the curse, they all faded into the past, slipping through her fingers like dust. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the face of the girl, the innocent version of herself. The smile was gone, replaced by something softer, something filled with understanding. And then there was only peace. The house stood silent, abandoned. Its windows, once full of dark reflections, now stared out at an empty horizon. The whispers were gone, and the echoes of the past had finally ceased. And as for Eliza, she was never found. The town near the manor went on with its quiet, uneventful life. Stories of the cursed house faded into nothing more than ghost tales, whispered among children daring each other to wander too close. People forgot the name of Eliza. People forgot that there had ever been a curse. But somewhere, deep within the bones of the earth, the cycle still lingered, waiting for the next soul who would find its letter and begin the journey all over again. This story is purely fictional and not based on any real events.